In this post-fact world, there are a few basic facts about the January 6th insurrection that even Republicans have generally been able to agree on. That it was, in fact, an armed insurrection at the Capitol, and that it put the lives of Americans, including members of Congress and Mike Pence, in danger. That's why a new talking point today from one of Trump's allies stands out, even for the Republicans. What you're about to hear is a blatant lie, a blatant distortion, not rooted in truth, from Republican Senator Ron Johnson. Listen.
The fact of the matter is, this didn't seem as like an armed insurrection to me. I mean, armed, when you hear of armed, don't you think of firearms? Here's questions I would have liked to ask. How many firearms were confiscated? How many shots were fired? I'm only aware of one. If that was a planned armed insurrection, man, you're really a bunch of idiots.
To call that an armed insurrection, it was the most pitiful armed insurrection anybody could ever possibly imagine. I mean, the one guy in the Senate chambers there, he had plastic wrist ties. You know, what was he expected to do? Literally go up to Mike Pence and capture him?
Right, take him under arrest, I mean, citizen's arrest.
It's absurd.
What? Was it really that bad? It's today's GOP. Capitol police officers on the scene didn't feel that way.
Multiple capital entries! Multiple capital entries!
1318.
812 to 50, we're coming around from the south side.
Be advised the speed and vision.
Intel 1, be advised, you got a group of about 50 charging up the hill on the west front, just north of the stairs. They're approaching the wall now.
They're starting to dismantle their reviewing stands and throwing metal poles at us. Cruiser 50, give me DSO up here now! DSO! Multiple law enforcement entries! DSO, get up here! You just had an explosion go on up here. I know the fireworks or what, but they're starting to explode explosives. Fireworks material.
Here's what else we know. NBC News reports that multiple guns, ammunition, and other weapons were seized from rioters. Federal officials also say that right-wing militia groups coordinated and planned their attack on January 6th. Joining our conversation, former Republican Congressman David Jolly and Jason Johnson still here. So, David Jolly, we're done saying there's no bottom for the Republicans, but I did not think we'd have a debate about what the definition of armed is in the wake of the insurrection. Yeah. Did you?
No, and look, Nicole, in many ways, Senator Johnson's ridiculous comments are a perfect reflection of the identity crisis that is burdening today's GOP. You know, as we're watching kind of the fissure in real time of the GOP, it's not so much around their electoral competitiveness. They're getting more votes than ever. They've lost control of the House and Senate, but, you know, only at the margins. But it's an identity crisis where this party is grappled with which side of the truth are you on? Which side of facts are you on? Are you pro-defending democracy, or are you okay kneecapping democracy? And that's kind of the absurdity of where the last 4 years have taken us. And in some ways, I suppose it's no surprise to hear Senator Johnson's comments. It's consistent with what we've gotten from the GOP. And I think the finer point it also places is that the greater injury to the republic, the greater travesty, was not the events of January 6th in the United States Senate chamber. It was the events of February 13th in the United States Senate chamber, when the likes of Ron Johnson and others trampled on the Constitution. The Constitution survived January 6th. We all watched that evening as the Electoral College vote was affirmed. The Constitution lost a round last Saturday, and it lost a round at the hands of 40-plus GOP senators that, yes, define now today's GOP, but also in many ways define who we are as a nation. And I think that's the tragedy coming out of this weekend.
You know, Jason, our friend Aaron Blake writes about this in a smart way. This is sort of the hoaxification of everything the Republicans don't like. If the facts don't work for your Trumpy base, change the facts. And I want to read you the facts as they were reported by one of his home state papers, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Among those arrested after the riot was Lonnie Kaufman, an Alabama man accused of bringing with him to Washington multiple firearms, 11 Molotov cocktails, a crossbow, smoke bombs, and a stun gun, all found in his truck near the Capitol. Samuel Fisher, a New York man who's facing federal charges, is accused of traveling to Washington with multiple firearms and a bulletproof vest. On January 6th, he allegedly posted an image of two guns, saying he would take the pistol inside with him and leave the rifle and vest in his vehicle. Quote, and if it kicks off, I got a vest and my rifle, end quote, according to the FBI. So Ron Johnson talks about idiots. I mean, I don't know what he reads. I've dealt with Republicans who struggle with that question, but it's all out there, how armed and dangerous the insurrectionists were.
And Nicole, this is the most dangerous thing and one of the most insulting things that politicians can do, or anybody in your personal life, which is the idea of defining something down to oblivion, right? Well, I wasn't cheating because we were both still clothed, or it's not racism because he didn't have a Klan hat on, or it's not murder unless you're using a machete, or it's not an insurrection unless they specifically paint insurrection on their foreheads instead of just Trump. That's what the Republican Party has been doing for years. They take whatever issue it is and they try to define it to the absolute minimal infinitesimal level and say if it doesn't reach that, then it's not insurrection. Obviously, Ron Johnson knows that it was an insurrection. Obviously, it was dangerous because he's got staff members and co-workers who are terrified by it. But I think what's most important to remember is that even the definitions that he's using, that's to make him sleep at night. Because I promise you, the people who were there, the people, I'm not just talking about the victims, the people who charged the Capitol, they were fomenting an insurrection. They knew they were armed, and they didn't feel that running around with pipes and bottles and bowcasters and weapons and lightsabers and whatever it is they had, they didn't think that made them unarmed. They felt fully prepared to go to war with the Congress and kill Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi.
You know, David Jolly, the part that I shouldn't spend as much time as I do trying to figure out is the why. Why are Republicans so committing to downplaying the horrors of the insurrection? Why are they invested in making the insurrectionists look better?
Look, I think you have to wonder about protecting their own legacy, convincing themselves it wasn't so bad, and so acquitting Donald Trump perhaps wasn't so bad either. But they also are playing to the fealty both of Donald Trump, but their own self-interest as well. Look, the bigger lie than the big lie is that somehow Donald Trump has been this moral, remarkable leader who has delivered great success over 4 years. He hasn't. And they have had to feed the lie that he has. And now in terms of his own arguably criminal behavior by the former president, that cannot be acknowledged either, or the party itself will suffer defeat for a decade or two. So, you know, a lot of people say, hey, why are Republicans so loyal to Donald Trump? I'd flip the script a little bit and say they're all loyal to themselves first. It's the common thread between Donald Trump and Ron Johnson and Kevin McCarthy and Lindsey Graham. They're all loyal to themselves and to their own self-interest. That's why we're seeing this behavior, because it works for them in their states and in their districts.
You know, the why is, these are the questions that keep me up at night, Jason, but the why around the big lie is one that still haunts me as well. And the $2.7 billion lawsuit that's been brought by Smartmatic, the multi-billion-dollar lawsuit by Dominion against Fox News and other, and Newsmax and other conservative outlets have left me wondering why go to the fabrication when those hosts are given so much latitude around opinion and around cheerleading. Why go to the straight-up falsehoods? And this Johnson quote made me wonder the same thing. Why create, and Kellyanne Conway said it first, an alternative fact around an insurrection that they all witnessed?
Well, it's one, because, as David mentioned, it's self-serving. Two, it's their ability to sort of explain their own behavior, not just, this is key, not just to voters, but also to donors, right? Like, because ultimately, this is about, can I get myself reelected? And Johnson and some of these other Republicans are going to have to go back to donors in the next couple of years and say, yeah, I voted to acquit. Yeah, I said it was garbage. I didn't think it was that dangerous. I didn't see anything. That's what they're going to have to say. They're going to have to plead ignorance in the face of this kind of violence in order to continue to do their jobs. Now, I don't think that's going to really hold. I think that most of those people will be held accountable. I'm sure one day we're going to see a viral video of one of these members of Congress saying this nonsense, and somebody on a Zoom is going to be like, actually, I was there and I had my eye gouged out. What do you say to that, Congressman? We know that's going to happen one day. But for now, they've got to tell this story so they can keep getting paid. I mean, the why is less problematic than the need for the why. And the need for the why is because these people know that they're inherently wrong, but they don't have anything else to stand for at this point.
Donald Trump's big lie in the months-long campaign to overturn the election that culminated in that deadly attack on the Capitol also turned out to be a big grift. Trump and the Republican Party raised a whopping $255.4 million in just the 8 weeks after the November election. Millions more going to Trump allies in Congress and various other so-called election integrity groups. Now the Washington Post reports an extraordinary story. One poor little GOP donor who gave $2.5 million to the conservative group True the Vote is suing to get all his money back, alleging that not only did the group fail to uncover any voter fraud, there wasn't any. His donations ended up in the pockets of people connected to the group. Imagine that. We're back with David Jolly and Jason Johnson. David Jolly, I have to read you. I don't know whether this is comedy or tragedy at this point, but let me read you this incredible piece of reporting. Like many Trump supporters, conservative donor Fred Eshelman woke up the day after the election with the suspicion something wasn't right. His candidate's lead in battleground states had evaporated. The next day, the North Carolina financier and his advisors reached out to a small conservative nonprofit group that was seeking to expose voter fraud. After a 20-minute chat with the group's president, he said, I'm in for two. 200,000? 2 million. I mean, there you go. There's your original sin. The country's Homeland Security Department, the person in charge of protecting our elections, said that this was the most secure election in our country's history. And then lawsuit after lawsuit came up with nothing. There wasn't anything. I mean, this grift may be the most successful operation Trump ever ran.
Yeah. Yeah, Nicole, I read that and I thought Jim and Tammy Faye Baker came around one generation too early. If Tammy Faye Baker hadn't died, she'd get Jim. They'd come out of retirement. When you see the people around Donald Trump, it's very similar to the Build the Wall initiative,
right,
a year or two ago, led by Steve Bannon. I think it's hard to explain individual motivations behind those gifts and those givers. But what we do know is it's easy to pass judgment on the people soliciting those donations because they know they're doing so through fraud, through a lie. And look, there very well could be a civil case for this gentleman to say that he was giving in response to what was a fraud. I mean, states have very robust laws around donations of this type. I do think at the end, though, it's also reflective of why Donald Trump and his family will remain in domestic politics and in international business. Because for them, that's where the money is. The longer the family stays in politics, he's able to monetize everything from his red hat to donations for future campaigns to a legal defense fund. And while his businesses domestically might be looked down upon right now by many otherwise corporate partners, overseas, the name still works. And I think that is a footprint for Donald Trump for the years to come.
I think this story piqued my interest, Jason Johnson, because it's attached to the last story. For this gentleman, and I don't know who he is, and I don't really have any views about whether he's successful or not in court, but he spent $2 million, which is a ton of money no matter who you are, because he accepted a 4-year-long campaign against the deep state. This gentleman certainly had access to the news, and the news reported very early on that there was no evidence of voter fraud. Bill Barr was telling Donald Trump shortly after the election that while he would follow up and investigate these things, there wasn't any. Of course, Christie, lots of people in the Trump side of the media ecosystem were telling these people the truth. This, to me, is tied to the last story because this is the most dangerous thing that endures from the Trump era. The disinformation, the delegitimizing knowledge and information from trusted sources. And this $2 million, he spent that on a lie that he had every access to information that would have told him it was a lie.
Nicole, I wonder, how did you become a millionaire if you're this dumb with money? And I can imagine him going in front of a judge right now. The judge's saying, hey, did you ever get a letter from a prince saying, send me $200,000 and I'll we can exchange the cash or some sort of scam? This guy must have been a... Yeah, exactly. Like this guy must have been an absolute sucker. Nicole, I looked him up. He is a Carolina alum like me. He gave a speech at Carolina about 2 years ago saying, never stop learning. Always look at any business situation from 180 degrees and figure it out. Follow your own advice, buddy. Okay? You're like an insult to the rest of us Carolina grads. I have no sympathy for him. I have no sympathy for anybody who gave any money to any of these crazy scams. And anybody who wants to continue to give money to stop the steal or Trump or any of this nonsense, Johnsons, they deserve to get ripped off. Not only did they have access to information, but there was better ways to spend it. If you've got $2.5 million to throw at somebody after a 20-minute conversation, you could have run for Congress yourself. You probably would have been more successful.
You know, David Jolly, there's a great line in Ted Lasso where he's playing darts with someone and he beats him, and he talks about how curiosity is this sort of underappreciated strategic advantage. And if you don't ask questions and you don't stay curious, you could get outdone by someone who has access to information and facts. And that seems to be how this gentleman may be out $2.5 billion that he wants back. They stopped asking questions. They stopped trusting anyone other than Donald Trump.
Yeah, and look, it flipped the script a little bit. It also speaks to the sophistication of Donald Trump's ability to defraud people, right? We know through Art of the Deal, he confesses to the fact of using lies and grandiose language to try to make people feel good and to take a buck from them. We also know, if you go to a much more serious analogy, the way QAnon works. They feed the little lies and the little lies and the little lies, and they turn into the big lies, and they've got you hooked. That is where, you know, Donald Trump has been a master of monetizing his entry into politics, and I think it's where it will continue. Hopefully what we see from this moment are some hard lessons learned and a course correction by much of the nation.
David Jolly, Jason Johnson, thank you both so much for spending some time with us today.